Greetings and salutations, my friend. You may have heard this phrase, "I left the left," multiple times on the internet. And the first example that comes to my mind is Dave Rubin.
You might think you're a progressive. I used to think I was. This isn't the recipe for a free society. It's a recipe for authoritarianism. For these reasons, I can no longer call myself a progressive. I don't really call myself a Democrat either. I'm a classical liberal, a free thinker. And as much as I don't like to admit it, defending my liberal values has suddenly become a conservative position.
And, you know, Dave Rubin, he's a gay man. He used to call himself a liberal. His show, The Rubin Report, was part of the Young Turks network. And to understand this phenomena of why people are leaving the left, we have to ask ourselves this one simple question. Has their views changed over time to become more aligned with conservatives? Or has the left changed as a whole? And in some instances, even questioning the left or realizing that not everything on the right is bad might lead you to being called all sorts of names. One phrase that it's raining like crazy right now. One phrase that I really like came from Bill Maher himself. And Bill Maher said,
"Let's get this straight. It's not me who's changed, it's the left."
And I think that in this short, simple phrase, there's so much answer to what is going on. I think in most instances where people are leaving the left, it is because the left has changed, not necessarily because they have changed. Although, to a certain degree, they most likely did as well. Bill Maher used to be on a show called Politically Incorrect back in the 90s and early 2000s. First time I've heard of Bill Maher was on the Howard Stern show, out of all the places. I can totally imagine how an old school liberal, and by old school I don't necessarily mean a classical liberal, because a classical liberal is basically modern day conservative. An old school liberal is basically a liberal who did not adapt this modern progressiveness and ideas of wokeness. And I think this paints a perfect picture of how someone who used to identify as a liberal in the 90s may have very, very little in common with someone who calls himself a liberal in 2023.
It's the left, who is now made up of a small contingent who've gone mental and a large contingent who refuse to call them out for it. But I will.
A few years ago, when I left university, and I was absolutely tired of what you might call wokeness, I used to watch a couple of those "Why I Left the Left" videos. And a few examples that come to my mind is Arielle Scarcella, a lesbian YouTuber who I've been watching since 2012. I think there's no other YouTuber that I've been following for that long, to be honest, which is kind of crazy.
I'm not one of them.
Another example I can think of is Amala Ekpunobi. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. So Amala, if you're watching this, don't hate me. If it makes up for it, I think you're beautiful.
And then every day I would go into work and you would hear nothing but hate and hate and hate and hate, specifically from people who claim to be tolerant. A big part of what made me question it was going into work and hearing a lot of hate towards white people. And I'm half black, and I was raised by the white side of my family. So it was a hard thing to go into work every day and hear from all these different people of all different races, many of whom were white, that they hated white people and just crazy, blatantly racist things. So that was my initial call out, and I went to the VP and I said, "I don't understand why you feel this way about white people. You have people at this organization who are white working with you. Should I feel that way about the family that's raised me?" And he said, "You don't understand how oppressed you really are. You should be angry."
And those types of videos really resonated with me, because at that point I felt like there is absolutely nothing with the modern left that I could find relatable at all. Usually, when I see people make this type of video, when they explain why they left the left, usually those type of videos fall into two categories. it is either someone who's moderately liberal, that just can't find common ground with modern progressives, or it was someone who is very, very woke, but eventually grew out of it, either by interperspective analysis of their own thoughts, their own values and opinions, or by exposure to right-wing media.
But with Hillary, there's not even the same universe. I mean, she is an abject, psychopathic demon from hell that as soon as she gets into power is going to try to destroy the planet. I'm sure of that.
Now, I was neither of those categories. So if you ask me why I make a video in which I explain why I left the left, how could I possibly leave the left if I was never on the left to begin with? And well, here's the thing, if we go back all the way, I was never a political person when I was younger. Throughout my teenage years, I had no interest in politics whatsoever. My interest was mainly in classic cinema. My interest was mainly nature, science, philosophy, that sort of thing. I never ever found myself concerned with politics. And that is something I'm really, really grateful for, because when I see those kids who are like 13, 14, 15, and they call themselves activists, I'm thinking, you know absolutely nothing about the world, you know absolutely nothing about life. And it's usually very, very privileged people who, well, what kind of struggles do they have? It's all first world problems, really. How can you know what's best for society, and how can your solutions be reasonable at all? I think if you fall into this kind of political fanaticism, because you have to be a fanatic of sorts to be an activist, that shapes you from a very young age, and it's much harder to grow out of it, because now this is no longer just your political opinions, this is your identity. Well, I think that if you start developing political ideas and developing interests in politics later in life, like in your 20s, I think you might develop a more clear picture of what reality is really like. Now, at a time period from 2012 to 2015-16-ish, I used to be trans. And if you're new to this channel, well, you just found out. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you already know that, since till now that was the main focus on my channel, really. And there is this sort of expectation that the very virtue of being trans is automatically a liberal or a progressive thing. And I don't think that's the case, you know. For me, that was never a political thing. I had a mental illness. I got better. I'm okay now. But there was never anything political about it. So back when I was trans and I was in high school, we had to make a presentation in class. It was an English class about basically any topic, like any issue in society that we think is important to talk about. And the one topic I chose is the dangers of the hookup culture. And mind you, that was like 2013, and hookup culture was already on the rise back then. I was talking about how hookup culture is damaging for one's mental health, both for males and females, and I think we really underestimate just how much of a danger it is for males as well, because it is not a female exclusive issue. And how hookup culture will have negative effect on future generations. I think that such values as monogamy, family, and loyalty are very, very important. I was always big about family values. You know, that was something that was very important to me, and that might sound like, well, that is a very, very conservative perspective I was coming from, right? And yes, in a way I was. I found myself to be more conservative than my peers in Norway, where I live. But I also used to live in Poland, and my views used to be considered quite liberal there compared to people around me. It was after I first detransitioned in 2016 that I actually started to be in touch with LGBT community, like both gays and bisexual and trans people, and some non-binary people. And you know, my position at the time was already that I don't think you can become the opposite sex. And I don't think there's more than two genders, to be honest. The idea itself, to me, just doesn't sound realistic or appealing. And I get what they mean by that. You know, I get what they mean by identity, but I don't think you can identify as something that doesn't exist. You know, I can understand why a man might identify as a woman, and I can understand why a woman might identify as a man. Because those concepts, man and woman, they're existing concept. It's something you can grasp, it's something you can actually identify as, you know. But you can't identify as something that doesn't exist, because human sex is binary. Still, most of the time, I've kept those thoughts to myself. And honestly, I had a pretty good relationship with the LGBT community. I considered a lot of those people my friends, and there are still people within that community who I consider my friends to this day. But there are certain thoughts that I just wasn't willing to share, in fear that those people will abandon me if they find out. They didn't even know that I'm a detransitioner. I never told anyone. When I first started studying at a university, I was studying philosophy. Started in 2017, and that's the mindset I started with. You know, let's not bring up politics. And for the most part, that's how my time at university was spent. And here's the thing: the university I was at, I wouldn't consider it to be woke, because here's the thing, I don't really like that word woke, because I think it's so overused, honestly. Like, almost everything is called woke these days. I get called woke too, because I support gay marriage, and I think it's okay to have gay relationships in video games, etc, etc. That doesn't make me woke, you know? Because what exactly is wokeness? And there is no proper definition out there, and I think we all have sort of an abstract idea of what wokeness is. But the thing is that when things are abstract, they can't be clearly defined, and then the word gets abused. So the way I define wokeness, a far left-leaning person with a strong belief in his own moral high ground, who believes that the freedom of speech and expression of those who disagree should be either limited or completely eliminated. And I think that is the best way to define it, and through that definition to separate everything that is woke from everything that is liberal but not necessarily woke. As such, not everyone who, let's say, supports Black Lives Matter or who thinks that kids should be on puberty blockers is a woke person. They just don't know any better, because that's the only source of information and opinions that they've been exposed to. And for a long time, I was mostly surrounded by very liberal, very left-leaning people, even though I wasn't that political myself. But because I was part of that environment, it sort of shaped my views on conservatives. And you know, you develop this sort of view that a conservative person is a racist, homophobic bigot, like a hateful, spiteful person, you know. And I remember when 2016 elections in the USA, and the thing about the election in 2016 is that every single country in Europe was talking about it. You know, it leaks from America and comes here. And the only opinions I've heard of how horrible Trump was, you know. And for a long time, that's what I thought, because that's the only opinion I've been exposed to. And I am no Trump supporter by any means. I think he's a deeply flawed individual. I don't think he's a good president. But I also think he's been demonized to a degree that he doesn't deserve, especially when some of his political competitors are just as bad, if not worse than him. I mean, Hillary, Biden, Bush, really, I find all three of them to be actually worse than Trump.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
And we're going to debate the next 3 weeks, I'm told, gay marriage, a flag amendment, and God only knows what else. I can't believe the American people can't see through this. We already have a law, the Defense of Marriage Act, where we've all voted, not where I voted and others said, look, marriage is between a man and a woman, and states must respect that.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids.
And so when I started at the university, I had this very negative view on conservative people, but I didn't necessarily have a negative view on liberals, because at that point I still haven't developed any issues with them. But it started gradually, you know, and I think I was already critical of like the gender theory, and on top of that, well, one of the first things that really made me question it was like liberals and trans people saying how if you don't date a trans person, you're a transphobe.
If you're cis and you won't date trans folks, you're a transphobe. Now if that made you mad, maybe it's your prejudices that you need to probe.
Would you date a trans person? Well, if you said no, I'm sorry, but that's pretty discriminatory.
I know you think you've got good reasons, maybe you do. Trauma's real, it's hard to heal, I'd never say that that isn't true. But transphobia is transphobia, and you won't get a pass when we're through.
I was thinking, this is the most stupid statement I have ever heard in my whole life. And I've heard many more stupid statements since then, but at that point, it was the most stupid shit I've heard. I mean, first of all, by saying something like that, you automatically alienate a lot of allies. You know, people who are like, hey, I won't date a trans person, but I can be friends with a trans person. But no, that's not enough. And here's the issue with the liberal left, or actually I would say illiberal left. Illiberal left operates on this principle that it is never ever enough. And that's the issue with wokeness. You can never be woke enough. There's always the next level. There's always the next level, you know. And you will fall off at some point. Unless you're an absolutely insane person. I was thinking, well, the right to date whoever you want, the right to love whoever you want, and to sleep with whoever you want is exactly what LGBT community was established on. And now it's shits all over it. It's like, no, you don't have a choice. You either sleep with trans people or you're a transphobe. There's nothing in between. Such a black and white way of thinking, man. At that time, I still used to call myself a feminist, and when I say that I used to be feminist, I don't necessarily mean all the crazy feminist shit you would see on the internet. I think what drove me to take interest in feminism is, first of all, I used to live as a trans woman for a while, and it occurred to me very clearly how women experience less respect, receive less respect than men. I've seen it so many times where some woman, some girl, get called, let's say, oh, this is Tommy's girl, and I would never call her by her name. Such shitty behavior, you know? And now I think that sexual harassment, catcalling, and assault is a Huge, huge problem. And I still think all those things. My opinion hasn't changed at all. But I stopped calling myself a feminist, even though I still hold those same opinions. I'm very much against objectification of women, of sexual objectification. I'm against pornography. And the thing is, I used to think of those values as very feminist. And then I went to the uni, and oh boy, I think that's when I saw the reality of what feminism actually is. So, interacting with other students at university wasn't really that bad, you know. Most of my opinions I kept to myself. They assumed I was much more liberal, much more left-leaning than I actually was. I assumed that they weren't as left-leaning as they actually are. And yeah, most of the time we just talked philosophy and life and just stupid shit, you know. Politics was rarely ever mentioned, but there were times where I would openly talk about women's issues, you know. I was concerned with that. But one day, this woman I used to study with, I talked to her about men's issues, you know, the issues men are facing, and I think they're equally as important as women's issues. Men are 50% of human population, you know. We need to create a good opportunity in society for men in order for men to thrive. Because when men don't thrive, the society collapses, you know. And I think that this issue needs to be addressed. And her reaction to that was just like, who cares about men? You know, I realized it's not about equality. It's about wanting privilege, basically. And so in 2018, when me and all the students were out drinking, and a topic came up, and someone said, "Gosh, I really hate Jordan Peterson. I fucking hate that guy." And I had no idea who Jordan Peterson was at that time. This is how I found out about Jordan Peterson, and so I did look up some of his videos, you know, and I was like, that guy's talking sense, you know. I sort of agree with him.
Like, okay, so you're a young man, and all the women are rejecting you. Who's got the problem? It's not all the women. That's a bad road to go down. If all the women are rejecting you, it's you. Was you'd have a child who was gender non-conforming temperamentally, somewhat like you were. You didn't have a pattern of female interests, and then prone to depression and anxiety, and then that combination would produce this gender dysphoria, and that would become quite intense around the dawn of puberty. But if you just backed the hell off and waited, those kids would settle into their body, but generally adopt a homosexual orientation. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there.
So one of those guys I used to study with didn't have an ID with him, and the bouncer didn't want to let him in. And he started calling him racist. You know, all those other girls who were there, they were like, "You're racist, you're racist, you're racist." I was like, "Yo, well, this is insane. This guy's just doing his job, you know? Like, he hasn't done anything wrong. I can't possibly see a reason to think that he was racist. You know, what the fuck?" And so everyone's like, "We're leaving this place." I'm like, okay, let's go somewhere. I think we went to Burger King or something like that. And like, on our way out, you know, one of those women turned around and just showed a middle finger to that guy. It was like, fuck you, you racist. Mind blown. And here's the thing, in Norway, yeah, sure, universities are quite liberal, but you don't see the same level of insanity as you would do in the US, you know. We don't have groups of people shouting, waving banners, nothing like that, right? So this sort of behavior is more hidden. It's not out in the surface, but you can still see it play out in certain situations. I think the only protest at my university that I know of that has happened was when they were protesting some event held by this organization run by conservative students, which at the time I didn't even know it existed, to be honest. And then in 2020, the death of George Floyd happened, and well, you know, my first reaction was, I knew that there was such a thing as Black Lives Matter. I didn't know all the details. I was like, to me, it was like Black Lives Matter, and of course it does, duh. And then all lives matter. I'm like, of course it does, duh. What the hell's the issue? I mean, I agree with both statements, right? I didn't really know much about it, you know, because I wasn't interested. So when George Floyd died, my natural reaction was to, oh shit, I feel really sorry for the guy, you know, this is a big problem. But also, I didn't know everything about the case. You know, I was thinking, oh, here's a bad cop killing an innocent guy. Not exactly the case, you know. Once you realize that George Floyd held a pregnant woman at a gunpoint, and once you start thinking about all the shit the BLM has done in 2020 with rioting and burning shit, how many businesses that were owned by black people were ruined? I'm like, who does it serve? You know? And I realized very quickly just how much of a financial scam BLM was, and nobody was talking about it. You know, here's the thing, I started digging into it and finding out like all the Marxist shit about it. You know, the BLM tweet, Fidel Castro, like rest in peace or rest in power, Fidel Castro. Some very positive statements about Mao.
I was at the art publications table today, and I was speaking to this young person from Arizona who's trying to fight SB 1070. And he grabbed the book and he said, it's like Mao's Red Book. And I was like, man, that's what I was thinking. And it was just really cool to hear him make that connection.
And here's the thing, I was born in Poland, okay? And Poland was under the influence of communist Soviet Union, right? I don't really have much sympathy for that ideology. You know, it's like my grandfather went to prison several times because he was actively fighting against commies. I had people in my family fighting in World War II against Nazis. Those are two groups of people I find it really, really hard to respect. Once you start to realize this looming threat on freedom of speech, well, do you think I would just turn my back on that? And what I did is basically, in a matter of 3 months or so, I let every thought that I was holding in all this time out. And oh boy, my Facebook friends started dropping like flies, right? Because most of my Facebook friends, just my real life friends, were very, very liberal. And shit really did hit the fan when it was after Pride Month 2021. There was this photo that won a photo contest at Pride in Netherlands, right? It was Netherlands. It's disturbing. Basically, what the photo is a bunch of men in like kinky outfits surrounding a little girl who's maybe 3 years old. You know, and I just thought, this is evil, okay? Like, I'm not a Christian, but I believe in the devil when I see this. I just want to run to the church and just wash my hands with holy water after seeing this shit. I wrote a status. I posted this picture and I wrote how I think that every single person involved in this should get a life sentence. And that's when a lot of my Facebook friends just left. Good riddance. I mean, someone told to me, you know what, get the fuck out of here with your conservative opinions. And I thought, you know what, I think I'd rather be a conservative than supporting this shit. This evil, evil shit. Granted, I lost a lot of acquaintances. They're not just online, but in real life as well. A lot of people who wouldn't talk to me. And in their eyes, I was now a homophobic, transphobic, racist bigot. And I'm none of those things, you know? You can think that exposing kids to kink is bad, while also supporting gay people. I don't see the connection there. I think that you can support trans people, while at the same time thinking that there is an issue with over-transitioning, especially when it comes to kids, especially when it comes to people on the spectrum, and people who are gay. You can be critical of an organization and movement like Black Lives Matter without being racist. So I found myself, just playing with the thought, with the idea that, okay, am I conservative? Never in my entire life did I ever think of myself as a conservative. Previously, when I was younger, and when I was thinking of conservatism, I used to think of the type of people who would say video games would turn you into a murderer, or the type of people who would use a scapegoat whenever a school shooting would happen. Like, oh, he listened to Ozzy Osbourne, he listened to Marilyn Manson, he listened to Judas Priest, and stuff like that. When I was thinking of conservatism, I used to think of the Catholic Church telling me when I was a kid that if you read that Harry Potter book, you will burn in hell. None of that is relatable, to be honest, and I realized that my opinion of conservatives is not necessarily correct. And I found out that a lot of those things they say, a lot of those things they think, is the same shit I'm thinking. I'm like, well, we certainly have a common ground here. Was I wrong about them? Because the type of opinion I have developed about conservative people was pretty much based on what kind of opinions I was exposed to. And I think this is one of the biggest problems in politics today, is that, and it's not just the left, because the right does that too, it is assigning an ethical value to the person who has the opposite political opinion. So for a liberal who holds that sort of mindset, a conservative person is a bad person simply by the virtue of being a conservative. And for a conservative person, a liberal person is automatically a bad person just by the virtue of being a liberal. And that is so polarizing. And it's like they want you to pick either Team A or Team B. You know, the crazy thing about it is that we live in a world where thinking that it's normal to think there's 1 million genders, but politics is somehow binary. Okay? Are you okay? And so if I ask myself, well, did I really left the left? Well, not exactly. First of all, I was never on the left to begin with. People just assumed I was. But I'm not exactly on the right either. I think this is a conclusion people jump to too quickly, because if someone opposes wokeness, they automatically assume they're conservatives. And you may have some common ground with conservatives, but you're not necessarily a conservative. And if you actually do become one, that's okay. You know, people grow, people change their minds throughout their lives. Nothing wrong with that. But I don't think that everyone who wakes up to that becomes a conservative or even has to become one. Because here's the problem, and especially in countries which have such a binary political system when you have two main parties, that allows for that Team A and Team B sort of mentality, right? So now you have all those people and you push them towards this one side. Well, guess what? What happens now is that on the right you have a group of people with very diverse views. And that's not gonna work long term. I realize this is a sort of coalition. And perhaps that is a good thing. But I think at this point we need to realize that liberals and conservatives can cooperate to fix an issue. I don't think that the left is all bad. And I don't think that the right is all good. Both sides have good ideas. Both sides have some really bad ideas. And I don't think that what is the left should be defined by the most extreme wokeness. Because that would be sort of like defining the right by Ku Klux Klan, you know? A YouTuber named Head made a video, I think 1 or 2 years ago, in which she sort of answers this question whether she moved to the right, and she said she's still very much on the left, even though a lot of the things she says, a lot of conservatives would agree with. But I don't see Head as a liberal, as a conservative, and from what I understand, neither does she. And on top of that, she's a socialist.
So first of all, if I was going to leave the left over left-wing people being mean to me, I would have left the left like 8 years ago. I know it's hard for these people to understand because their extent of politics is quite literally Discord servers and Reddit communities. You cannot be kicked out of opinions. Like, I could call myself a right-winger right now, but I would be the shittiest right-winger ever, probably on account of the whole, I don't know, socialism thing.
When Head said that, I was sort of happy about it, because I was thinking, you know what? We need people like that on the left. We need good people on the left to balance out the stupid shit on the left. Because once all the reasonable good people leave the left and become part of the right, guess what happens? Everyone on the left will be an absolutely shitty person. And that is not healthy for any society. Call me crazy, but I think that the left and the right need each other. You know, it's like a plane needs 2 wings to fly properly, to keep the balance in society. And it's through healthy debate, it's through conversations that we actually achieve something as a society. And this counterbalance the left and right has for each other, this relationship, is very symbiotic if you think about it. You know, we don't have to be enemies. Because I don't think that all progress is good. And you need this counter argument. Like, hold on. Before we go there, and like at the same time, we also need the left. We need liberal people, we need open-minded people to actually produce new ideas, because society needs to move forward. Society needs progress. And so all ideas need to be challenged too. And that can happen in a society that knows the concept of healthy debate. At this point, a Western society, and especially USA, doesn't even know what a healthy debate looks like. And I'll give credit where credit is due. I think conservatives are at least more open to having the discussion than liberals are. But you know, I know a lot of liberals who are open to discussions. We having some really interesting conversations, and a lot of the time I found out that some of the most fascinating conversations I ever had was not with people who were agreeing with me. It was with people who were disagreeing. And so, no, I am not on the right. And I think it's okay to be politically homeless. A lot of people think that being politically homeless means being undecided, being a fence sitter. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's okay to just not see things in such a black and white colors, to recognize the shades of grey. This is what a healthy society needs, you know, like a variety of different positions and opinions. And whether political homelessness is something temporary before you find yourself, or if it's your permanent state. I don't believe there are permanent states really, but if it's something, it's a long-term thing, that's okay too, you know. I am definitely an egalitarian and an anarchist, first and foremost, before I'm a liberal or conservative. So in conclusion, I am liberal, but I am not a liberal. And I'm conservative, but I am not a conservative. If you find yourself questioning your politics or your values because you found yourself so fed up with, well, either side really, I hope that you will find this video just as relatable as I did with the videos I used to watch. So, take good care of yourself, my friend, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao. Amala, if you're watching this, I hope I'm pronouncing your name wrong. No. What?